Yes, thank you. I think Noah Webster is the most important person who contributed a lot to the rise of the English as a global language. Because, as you know, Webster is in the title of the American Dictionary. And most people are familiar with the name Noah Webster because many people still use it this day. And he was a lexicographer, which means that he created the dictionary, and he thought that a great nation like USA, they needed an own language, which is American. So he was responsible for many of the spelling differences between Americans and British. So Webster decided to make changes because he wanted English to have a difference from French, from influenced by French, just like the British. So he wanted more logical, and he wanted more less influenced by French. So it means that he wanted to create an independent language, an American, that has not many influence from others. So yes, and to do that, he published his grammar books starting in 1783. So he had a really great mind on making an own language, which was an American English, which many people use it. So in that grammar book, it was included there was a speller, and there was a grammar, and there was a reader, which means that speller is to check their grammar spelling, right, correctness, and the grammar is that how we just say it, obviously it's a grammar, and the reader is the how to pronounce it, how to accent, how to say it right. So he contributed a dictionary which was a complete thing about English. So in that dictionary, it includes of his life and of his American USA people's history, and the language is in the dictionary now we know as the Noah Webster. So I think he is a really important person who really influenced the rise of English as a global language. Thank you very much.
Hello everyone, my name is Sayan Park, and I kind of agree with Donggu's idea that Noah Webster was very powerful. He put a lot of impact on English, but I think Samuel Johnson is much more, he did much more, like he put more impact on English, because Samuel Johnson is a person who was born in 1709 in England, and he was also worked as a lexicographer as Noah Webster. But he's the one who published the first dictionary called A Dictionary of English Language, the first definite English dictionary. And he also created a widely imitated style of biography and literary criticism to the modern English. And as you guys know, there are a lot of versions of English based on different cultural backgrounds, such as Creole, Old Norse, or Middle English, or Native English in that kind of period. But as you guys know, those Englishes are all mixed English. But he's the one who defined the English at once, so that we can communicate in one language called English right now in modern English. So I think Samuel Johnson is the person who put the most powerful impact on English. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Sun Young Chung, as you guys know, and like the Tonggu and the Sayan said, the Noah Webster's and Samuel Johnson, they are both doing a really good in a development of English, but the Shakespeare is the best, I think. Shakespeare, he is a writer and poet and a literature at the same time. And as Professor said, we learned that he invented 3,000 words with a new words like assassination. What he doing is in literature. I think the literature is surrounds every aspect of life. That means Shakespeare actually touched every aspect of our life and make our life abundant with the new word and a new grammar things. According to the Google Wikipedia, is that in Shakespeare's days, the English grammar, spelling, and pronunciation were less standardized. However, because of his working, it helped more shaping the modern English. And also, his plot and writing and poem spread all over the world, which affect English language more globally accepted and widen the aspect of the usage. And that's why I think that Shakespeare is the one who really make a great thing for English usage and also develop in a various words and yes. That's why Shakespeare called as England's national poet. Thank you.
As 동구 서현 선영 focused on the development of English language, I wanted to focus on the spread of English. And I believe that Thomas Woodrow Wilson is the person who made the most powerful impact on English. Do you guys know who Thomas Woodrow Wilson is? He is the 28th President of America. He was elected as the president in 1913 and ended in 1921. In 1914, the First World War I was broken. And in 1917, America sent their troops to Europe in order to fight against the German and Turkey. After fighting a while, America won. And from that time on, America started to be recognized as the most powerful nation in the world. So I believe that Woodrow Wilson, making America the most powerful nation in the world and making other countries to follow America, he is the most powerful, he's the person who made the most powerful impact on English language. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Eugene Rowe, and I'm presenting about Shakespeare. I think Shakespeare is one of the most important figure in English history. There are several reasons for this, but I'm presenting roughly 3 reasons for choosing this figure. First of all, he introduced many words, vocabularies to English, and that is really important. I personally think it's more important than making a dictionary or coming up with grammar, because it's about usage and culture of English, and I think that's one of the most important thing in one language. He introduced some words like champion, bedroom, gossip. These are the languages we nowadays use so frequently. Also, he made some plays. He wrote 37 plays, including Romeo and Juliet, Macbeth, and Hamlet. Nowadays, we all know these plays, and we sometimes make it into movies. And that's one of the great source of English culture, and how also all the people from another cultural background enjoy English. Also, period of change and dramatic changes took place when Shakespeare was born, and it was a very important period of English. And Shakespeare has transferred all this public, not only the nobles and those who had access to language, but also the public to use English and truly enjoy use of language. So I think Shakespeare is one of the most important figure in English history. Thank you.
I'm very proud of the fact that many students are choosing the Shakespeare who having an impact on the English development. And I choose the Shakespeare, who has the having an impact on the English spread and development. Like they said, one of the reasons he's famous for is the effect on the development of the early modern English language. And for example, even without realizing it, our everyday speech is full of his words and praise which he invented. For example, before Shakespeare's times, English language was not standardized, so his work contributed significantly to the standardized English, especially grammar and spelling and vocabulary. For example, lonely and frugal and dwindle is the basic example. Thank you.
Hello everyone. The person I picked is Dr. Samuel Johnson, the same as Hyun. The reason why I chose Dr. Samuel Johnson because he wrote the very first English dictionary called Dictionary of the English Language, and in 1755, and it's considered an outstanding work that had no competitor for more than a century. As you know, like in the late 17th and early 18th centuries, there was a significant increase in the misuse of English. However, since the boundary and rule in language were not fairly clear, any debate or disagreement over language would hardly possible. Dr. Samuel Johnson, with his dictionary of the English language, set up the standard for English at the moment. And the most important thing is Johnson didn't only quote, but also wrote the definition to more than 14,000 words. And also while writing his dictionary, he considered his dictionary to be used both by native speakers and by foreigners. So that's why he put a great care for, for example, for phrasal verbs such as fall in, fall out, fall back, fall to, fall on. So it's made easier for a foreigner to study English. So I think that's why the most important person who contributed a lot to the rise of English is Dr. Samuel Johnson. Thank you.
Okay, well, I think Shakespeare had a big contribution to English as a global language because, by the time that he wrote his plays, grammar and rules of English were not standardized, but after his plays, it helped to make or develop the grammar, and that's why his contribution is huge. And he changed the verbs into nouns, or nouns into verbs, and he connected words what never was done before. So, and I think if Shakespeare wasn't there, nobody would make the same connections. So, and also because all of his plays were so popular about the whole world, everybody was interested in seeing his plays and reading all the texts. So because of that popularity, people started to read English and see the special things about the language as a global language.
Hello again, my classmates. Thankfully, my clever classmates have already elaborated on the influence of Shakespeare in the English language. I also believe that he had the biggest influence in English language. It is that he has, like, as an individual, he has created the biggest number of vocabularies in English language. According to the research that I just did, it said that in his first printing of his books, there were so many words that he created that he had to like put explanation for each word so people know like what the new word is. Like the specific examples were already given by my other classmates. So I'd like to just share a quote with you. Queen Elizabeth, the queen of Shakespeare's time, said that they wouldn't trade Shakespeare even for the entire India. So it shows how much Shakespeare meant to Great Britain at that time. And I think to look further to influence of Shakespeare to English language, there is a book called History of English written by Bill Bryson. He's a very funny author, very informative, so I strongly recommend to read that book. Thank you.
I also chose Shakespeare as my influential English. Like all the other presenters said, he contributed in vocabulary and phrases, and he's also the developer of the modern English. So he gave change to not only words and phrases, but also in grammar, like Julia mentioned. In one way, there were no rules, and the use of English was more flexible. One point that the other presenters didn't mention is that English at that time was widely used for philosophy, theology, and science. But he was actually the first that used English artistically, like one of the first. So Shakespeare made it easier to express in not only scientific way, but more emotionally. So it made us more poetic, expressive, and more communicative. And yes.
Okay, it's very interesting. We have heard from our 10 students who is the most influential person who contributed to the rise of English as a global language, and Donggu. Donggu cited Noah Webster because people are talking about political independence of America. But actually, Noah Webster is the person who achieved the linguistic independence of America. That's why that makes a very important person. And Seohyun, she was talking about Samuel Johnson because of his contribution to standardize English. And anyway, this is especially meaningful when we consider there is all the different varieties of English, Creole form of English, and Pidgin and Asian variety of the English. That's why we must remember Samuel Johnson. Samuel Johnson, he was a very important person who contributed to make the standard English. And Sanyang, she introduced us Shakespeare. Shakespeare was a poet, and he was also actor, and she was also author. And also, it was interesting to hear from her that despite all the grammatical mistakes, that Shakespeare is the person who was for the first time shaped English into modern language. And Seungju was talking of political leader, American president, 28th president, because under his leadership, America, for the first time in its history, became the global leader in a true sense. And what about this speaker, Eugene? Eugene also talking about Shakespeare. Why? Because Shakespeare was the person who made English lexically rich. So he made a lot of words, and also he made a lot of plays. And also Hyungkyung also was talking about Shakespeare because in his time that there was no grammar has not yet been fixed. So actually, even in our daily life, many of our speeches came from the Shakespeare. And also his words is wonderfully flexible because it was free from any grammatical constraints. And Bella introduced Samuel Johnson, and Samuel Johnson was very. Actually, it's interesting to find that he attempted to define 14,000 words. This is something very significant. And also notable, he also cared about the phrasal verb. For example, like fall out and fall in, and get in contact. There are the phrasal word. This phrasal verb. Phrasal verb is very difficult for foreigners. Phrasal verb. So when he was talking about this one, then we can see, wow, Samuel Johnson was paying attention to the English learners, not only for native speakers, but also the foreign speakers. And Julia also talking about Shakespeare, and was talking about Shakespeare was a magician. He was a magician of the words, so he dared to use verb to noun. And also, what is amazing about Shakespeare has reached a global. He has a global reach. So actually, and even today, the peoples in global society is, in a sense, is united into his romance stories, because his stories is very universal, touching our heart. It's about love story. It's a tragic flaw of the hero. Even though he is the hero, he has a tragic flaw. For example, the Othello has become the victim of his tragic flaw. What was it? Jealousy. Jealousy. And Macbeth, he was also trapped into his own flaw, character flaw. What was it? His ambition. Suspicion. So, there are stuff. 다 했나? 또 있어? 다 했죠? Also, Taiwan. He also introduced us his Shakespeare's course, and Joara, and also she introduced Shakespeare. Shakespeare is a person who raised the bar of the English to another dimension, the higher dimension of art and emotion and poetry and communication. Okay, that's up our fourth round of topic.